Welcome to Victoria Rumble Room.
Whoa, what an intro. That is fabulous.
We're
Yes,
being really innovative. This is very high-tech stuff, Johnny. Very high-tech stuff.
welcome to the Victoria Rumble Room. You're right. John Juricic here, sometimes known as the Croatian sensation. Robin Adair, how are you this morning?
Well, John, it's been quite a couple of weeks. Lots of traveling back and forth across the country for some family stuff, and glad to be back in the saddle. Certainly lots of things going on, and we're going to touch on a few of those things. Then we have a special guest coming up momentarily. Chris Kilford's going to talk about what's going on internationally, Ukraine and Poland and the NATO situation. So we'll get to that in 2 seconds. I just wanted to quickly talk, John, about a couple of things that are really on my mind. One, we have a new leader of the Green Party who's 25 years old and says she's going to go after all of the very, very rich people out there, the oligarchs. She's going to campaign against the oligarchs, and she says she may even campaign against David Eby. And
This
of course, the Greens have had a comfy relationship with David Eby, so that could be interesting.
this is the end of the Green Party. Okay? They're done. Nobody wants to hear that kind of malarkey. She's now, I know we don't like to date our shows, but happens to be that she will be presenting to over 2,000 delegates at the UBCM as we're speaking. This is it. They're over. They're done. They will, unless they recruit an entire demographic of almost a million young people, they're finished. That's my opinion.
Well, Emily Lowen was just taken the job, so I think we got to give her a bit of time. But I mean, I think that David Eby would normally be, I think, a little worried that they could take off some of his support. But at the same time, John Rustad continues to shake away support of his own, as he's
Yeah.
just booted out one of his top representatives, his top MLAs. Eleanor Sturko was certainly outspoken and was not a big supporter, obviously, of John Rustad. He decided after they had a review of his leadership that he didn't want her there, and so he gets weaker. And I just don't see how that works for the BC Conservatives, and David Eby has to be breathing a sigh of relief about that.
Uh, think of this. You're a politician. You obviously have opponents. You've got to deal with issues. In this instance, your province is going bankrupt. You have no vision around how to turn that around. You don't have any economic development policy. You have maybe a one seat, maybe that or less majority in the pro. Oh, and the opposition. One is going so far left they're going to fall off the cliff, and the other one is eating themselves up. Great to be a premier in BC right now.
Well, and we could go down the rabbit trail of all the things that we're concerned about with David Eby, his position about pipelines and economic development.
Oh my
But
God.
we got a special guest, and there's so many things we can talk to Chris Kilford about. We just had Donald Trump speaking to the United Nations, complaining to the United Nations, speaking 4 times longer than he was supposed to, attacking so many countries and saying, the United Nations has really gone sideways and devaluing basically the worth of so many countries around the world and how they carry out their policies. But at the same time, hinting somehow that Ukraine maybe is justified in its war, could actually win this war and come back and be able to take back land that was unfairly taken away by Russia. A huge change for Donald Trump. What does this mean? Are the Americans going to get back in the saddle in terms of standing up for NATO countries and standing up for freedom in Eastern Europe? So we have somebody standing by who's kind of a student of all of this, and Chris Kilford, a former military officer, a lieutenant colonel, artillery officer. He's the acting branch president of the Canadian International Council. We've had him on the show before, but he's now on this is the new improved Rumble Room, and it's great to have Chris Kilford back with us to talk about these things and all things to do with Canada's military and our status on so many levels, including peacekeeping. So, Chris Kilford, welcome back to the Rumble Room after a long hiatus.
Hey guys, how are you?
We
Yeah,
are fantastic, Chris. We had a little muck up with our live stream. But we are recording and we are presenting to the great world of the Victoria Rumble Room. Hey, last time we saw you, we were having a few drinks together. How you been?
I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah, I mean, life's busy. Lots of things going on this week. four talks in Victoria this week alone. One right after this chat with you guys.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
what kind of
Exactly.
war sort of warming you up, I guess, for the day, right, Chris? Is that right? Or...
yeah, for sure. And I've even got one on Saturday also.
I've
Saturday
Oh,
got
morning.
I've got endless questions, as does Robin. But let me just check. I've got the TV right here because I haven't looked at it for 10 minutes. Has Trump changed his mind? It's been only 10 minutes.
I know. I know. It's true, isn't it? You have to keep watching every few minutes. And of course, he's meeting with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan today, and we'll see what comes out of that. There's a number of friction points, and um, yeah, you never know. Right, day to day, there's always something.
but what about the language around Ukraine? He was making noises, at least yesterday, and of course, this is going to be dated because this is going to be on for a whole week. But certainly, he's just made noises recently that maybe Ukraine was justified to be defending itself and could win this war and could take back territory. So, what do you make of the change of heart? And do you think there'll be a change in policy behind it?
I think that President Trump is a bit frustrated. Obviously, he wanted all of this to come to an end. He speaks about it all the time, how it would never have started if he had been the president. Um, that's debatable, of course. But if you're sitting in Moscow, imagine every day you're waking up to a different story from President Trump. At one moment he's meeting you in Alaska if you're Putin, and it looks like he's cozying up to Moscow. The next minute he's saying to the Ukrainians that, oh well, you know what, if you can, you could recapture all of that territory. But I don't think any of it really matters at the end of the day. Ukraine isn't able to recapture all of that territory, barring a catastrophic event on the other side. That is the collapse of the Russian military or the untimely departure of President Putin from the scene. And then even then, would they actually want some of that territory back, which has a large Russian ethnic um, majority? Of course, they would say yes, yes, indeed they do, but I don't think it would be good for the long-term health of the country to have um, those Donbass and maybe Crimea within Ukraine. But I mean, that's for Ukraine to decide at the end of the day. But the fact is, I don't think that their military is strong enough in the current circumstances to recapture territory, only on a small scale, really. They're defending, and they're defending very well.
Yes. I have a question for you. I've got so many questions for you. Okay. So Trump did this 180 recently. And I then also noted that there were some significant funding conclusions, military funding conclusions made in Europe around funding the Ukraine for the foreseeable future, maybe 2, 3 years down the road. And that funding solution included a very significant criteria. They weren't going to buy that military from the states. Okay, that was going to be a huge shift, a huge paradigm shift. I double checked it. You may know this, Chris, but almost literally within that 48 hours of that decision being made, Trump decides to change his mind. How much of this, in your opinion, is all being driven really by just the mechanics and monetary drivers of the U.S. military and European contractors buying that military?
Yeah. So I feel, look, at the end of the day, if you want to talk about winners and losers in this Ukraine conflict, obviously for Ukraine and Russia, at the end of the day, there are no winners there, right? There are no winners. Everybody has lost people. They've lost economic capacity. They've really mortgaged their future. So even if someone was to quote win the war, no one wins the war. They're all losers. So who are the real winners out of all of this? Our European and American, Canadian military industrial complexes, because they've been selling weapons, as Trump would say, like you've never seen before. And this is the key. Obviously, everybody knows that there are huge sums of money floating around to purchase defense equipment, and everybody wants to have a piece of that pie.
Mhm.
Now, if you're European and you're spending European money or British money, you want it to go into your own industries. It just makes realistic sense, right? It's realism. You don't want to have that money spent in the United States, and vice versa. The United States is saying, buy from us. So everybody's benefiting. Europe and America and Canada and others who make weapons for use in Ukraine are benefiting from all of this. Plus, they're benefiting from the fact that Trump has demanded NATO increase defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. And we're going to see part of this big deficit in Canada will be around more money for defense. So the defense companies are the winners. They're really benefiting. The workers, the owners, all of this, they're really benefiting from what is happening in Ukraine. So there we go. Everybody's contesting for that space. Now, the interesting thing is, it's not so simple. You can't sort of just say, well, buy European, buy American, because what you'll find, of course, is in a lot of European military products, tanks, airplanes, you name it, are parts manufactured in Canada or the United States, and vice versa. You'll find parts coming from Europe that are integral to American weapon systems. So it's very interconnected. So yeah, it's not so easy. But look, everybody's looking. If they're going to spend money, they want it spent in their countries.
Do you think in some ways we're seeing through the military what we saw previously with all these tariffs? In other words, Canada has been riding it very easily along the United States for a long time and relying on the United States and not worrying about diversifying their markets and not worrying about breaking down internal barriers in the country. Lots of things that you would have think they're kind of no-brainers as you look at it now, but Canada wasn't doing it. Then Trump suddenly umps the ante, makes tariffs really a big problem, and suddenly Canada's looking at all these new agreements it could make. It was just in Mexico. It's going to Korea and China again. They're building these new barriers, or taking down barriers, I should say, to try to build new relationships. And some of it's thanks to Donald Trump and his tariffs. Is the same, do you think, also true with the military? We've been getting by with a tiny military, not much military spending. Europe has been totally dependent on the Americans in terms of NATO. And now suddenly there's a threat from Putin and the U.S. has pulled back. Europeans and Canada are standing up and they're talking about we've got to get more serious. We're going to start purchasing more equipment. And now, Carney's even talking about possibly bringing in peacekeepers into Ukraine. So, I mean, do you think in some ways Trump again is doing the world a favor, maybe by accident almost?
There are about 20 questions there, Robin, and I'll do my best to unpack all of them for you. I think Canada gets a bad rap. I really do. People talk about us being free riders and not doing much on defense, and Trump's made us look at ourselves very closely, and that is true. Putin has also made us look closely at ourselves as well, so we can't forget him. But look, we discovered most European countries, their militaries were in dire shape. Germany and Poland, Great Britain, many hollow forces, all in need of close attention. So we were not the only ones that were, arguably riding on the American security blanket or underneath it. So there's that factor too. And although we are, heading off to India and Indonesia and Mexico and elsewhere to talk trade because Trump has pushed us in this direction, I think we have to give credit to Canadian governments over the last 20, 30 years who have actually diversified our trade portfolio. When we have trade agreements throughout the Indo-Pacific with Europe, with countries in South America, I mean, we're very, very good about this. Now, that doesn't mean to say that, trade with the United States suddenly becomes, under 50, less than 50%, 40. But no, it doesn't, because they're so close. I mean, we're so integrated, but we have done a really good job in diversifying. And now we're building on the success, I think, that we've had. And I think when you sum it all up together, you have to say, look, I mean, Canada sits with about the 8th or 9th largest economy in the world today. I mean, today, that's us. And up until recently, we were about the 15th highest defense spender in the world. Although that usually comes as a surprise to people. There are 193 countries countries in the United Nations, I mean, some are very small, of course, but we're the 14th, 15th highest defense spender in the world, and we're going to do more. That's great, but I still wonder where that money's coming from. But look, Canada is very, very, very well positioned for the future. And the fact that Trump's made us take a hard look at ourselves and internal trade barriers and stuff like that, yeah, it's really good. We needed a bit of a wake-up call. And I think we're finding most of the democracies in the world needed a bit of a wake-up call as well.
I don't want to give him any credit. Trump, that being Trump. However, that is likely the better result. That in fact we rebuild our military so that we have some independence from the United States, who's going down a path none of us know will end. But here's a question I have for you, Chris. It's really been perplexing me. Why is Russia sending their drones through Poland and through Romania? I think Romania. Why? Why? What's the strategy here?
Yeah, we've seen this. There have been cyber attacks. There have people have set fires to infrastructure in Poland. We saw drones entering the Polish airspace and being knocked down or crashing. We saw three Russian fighter jets enter Estonia's airspace for about 12 minutes. They're very unhappy about that and I brought this up at the Security Council. Um, I I really think that the reason we're seeing this in happening more and more is that it speaks to the frustration within Moscow about how the war is actually going, and that there's no return for what they've spent in terms of money and lives on that front line. And they are really reaching for anything that they can do to create a little bit of havoc for the European Union, for NATO members, in 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 what I would call a pretty pathetic response to what is actually happening. It just, to me, speaks to the um, the whole situation and their inability to make any changes on the front lines or with any or to push the European Union away or European countries away from supporting Ukraine. They're really, the playbook is over. I mean, they're at the last page of the playbook and they've got nothing left. And so this is what they're doing, these little pinprick things. Now, the thing with that, of course, is that with every little action they take, the reaction, of course, is that NATO responds with more soldiers, um, tightens up their cyber awareness, capabilities, becomes more aware of what the Russians are doing, and it's just in the end pointless, absolutely pointless. I mean, the best solution for Russia would be just to say, "Okay, we want a ceasefire. We've this is no good for us. We want to stop this. Let's talk. We want to really keep the Donbass and Crimea, but you can have the rest back, and please don't punish us anymore. Lift the sanctions, and we're terribly sorry." But of course, that's never going to
It's not
happen.
going to happen, no.
And
To
so,
what degree is Putin actually stuck in the 1940s? Every time he's interviewed about this war, he talks about the geographic realities in post-World War II. Is he really
yeah,
thinking that?
I think he's, to be frank, stuck in probably the 10th century when he gives us history lessons. And I think it was the Polish foreign minister or deputy foreign minister in the United Nations, in the Security Council in the last day or so, said very clearly to the Russian delegation, look, um, what is wrong with you? You you started the First World War, that, but that's what he said. You started the Second World War, you started the Cold War, and now you want to start another war. Why are you doing this? What do you not understand? But it's something going on there. Jeremy Kinsman, if he was here, would speak about a long-term psychosis in the Russian population over centuries. This sense of, I don't know, persecution, of being the other and not being a full player in Europe and not really knowing where they sit. Um, yes, I mean, I don't know where this will go. Do we want Russia, though, to fall into the hands of the Chinese? I mean, we have to ask ourselves these questions as well. Is Russia a counterbalance for us in the future against Russia? Do we want them to fail? Probably not. Um, I would say China has its designs on Russia, and if you're concerned about China, you don't want them to get any closer than they are. So there's a number of other geopolitical issues going around here, but yes, I mean Russia is Russia.
Let's shift. You talked about China, but I want to shift to something else that you're well aware of because you were a liaison in Turkey for quite some time, and I know that Erdogan is sort of seen as a great broker in the Middle East, and he's been kind of trying to be a broker with Ukraine and Russia, but he's also looking south. Syria now has a new president and a new regime, and this ongoing conflict, Israel and Gaza, it just never seems to end as well. And it's putting a lot of pressure on a lot of Arab countries that would like to be on side with the United States and yet don't want to be selling out entirely because they have to show some solidarity as Islamic countries. Uh, and in the middle of all this, our prime minister steps up and says that we recognize Palestine and we recognize that it should become a freestanding country. And he's even talking about Canadian peacekeepers in the Gaza at some future date. So what do you think of Canada's messaging here? Is it more to placate all those activists that we see marching down our streets virtually every weekend? Or does it truly mean that much to the world that Canada has decided to take this step?
I think there's genuine concern in Canada for the plight of the people in Gaza. And not only in Canada, but other countries that have recently recognized Palestine, such as Australia and France, the UK, and they join in now about a total of 150 countries who have said, we recognize Palestine. Um, is it symbolic? Well, arguably, it is symbolic. Um, but nevertheless, it's one way to show that as a country, most Canadians are not happy with what they are seeing in Gaza, with the way that the people there have found themselves. There's no uh, there's no interest in having Hamas ever continue in any role from the Canadian perspective. We've said that very clearly. They're a terrorist organization, and we want Palestinians to be able to, elect their own leaders free of the challenges that they've had in the past. There are issues with the Palestinian Authority, of course. I mean, it's not a democracy of any sort that we would recognize, and you do worry about the future of the Palestinian people writ large in the West Bank. There are more and more settlements. There's no interest in the Israeli government, certainly from Prime Minister Netanyahu, to come to any sort of agreement and recognize or integrate your Palestinians within the country. No, it's the opposite. So our gesture was an important one. Will it mean much at the end of the day? Probably not. I mean, we've seen Israel step across the line so many times with, for example, the recent attack in Qatar on the Hamas leadership. It was open, it was brazen, it didn't succeed, but needless to say, it put down a marker that Israel is prepared to do whatever it takes to safeguard its security. And I don't think there's a lot of hope for the Palestinian people in this paradigm that we're seeing. It will just continue to play out day after day on our televisions and in social media, and no one seems to be able to stop it. Now, Canada, of course, offering peacekeepers. Well, this seems to be the flavor of the day these days. Whether you're talking about Ukraine or in Israel, in Gaza, to send in an independent force. Well, look, we've had the UN there for ages, and Israel has treated the UN very badly in many, many ways, and UN peacekeepers they could care less about. So what kind of new force are you going to put in there? What kind of rules of engagement will they have? Will they end up in a fight against the Israeli military at some point? I mean, it's just a total mess that most countries at the end of the day, if really, really pressed, don't want to have anything. They don't want to have anything to do with it. If they did, if the Western world, if Canada and that were really interested in the security of the globe, and we'd have Canadians back in Haiti trying to help them, but we sidestep deploying peacekeepers there. I mean, why would we? I just can't see it myself happening.
I have a question for you around spending, procurement, money. Somewhat building upon that last question, as we seem to be moving more and more and more into military type solutions, peacekeeping type solutions around the world. That's all going to cost money. I've heard through my channels that the sort of procurement contracts for meeting the 5% military spending target are already in play. So I'm going to now bank upon some of your maybe inside information and see whether you can determine or tell us where that might be, where some of that spending might be going to the Army. Will it be more to the Navy, which would be very beneficial for the West Coast? Have you heard anything, Chris?
I haven't really got any inside information.
Ah,
Only because a lot of it is already out there. Okay.
huh?
Um,
They're going to buy
and
submarines, right? Lots of submarines.
yes, I mean, when you look at what is on the table, the first thing, of course, is that we have to decide if we are going to purchase the 88 F-35 fighter jets. Now, we've purchased 16, but we now need to decide this, and the government has that all under review. So we know that is out there. We know that the government has talked about 10 to 12 conventional submarines, and whether they come from South Korea or Germany is yet to be determined. So we know money would be there. We know that the Army wants more ground-based air defense. We know that they want surface-to-surface missiles like the HIMARS that or TACMs, that are being used in Ukraine. We know these are big ticket items, so there we go. There's a lot more, procurement-wise in there as well, but we know where that's going to go. But then from an infrastructure perspective, we hear Churchill mentioned quite often as a gateway economically and militarily, where you can put icebreakers and things there. So we know that's out there. We know the Arctic is a big concern, and we want to have a bigger presence there as well. So we know that too. We know pay raises are needed, and they're happening now, and housing needs to be sorted out for the military. So we know that. Will there be more people? Well, we'll see. So we kind of know what's out there in that bag of things. A lot of that 5%, about 1.5%, I believe, has to be directed towards improving your infrastructure and making it capable of, resisting cyber attacks or other attacks, that sort of thing. So there's that money out there as well. So yeah, I
I mean,
think
I've
I
heard the
think we
Coast
know.
Guard is now under a military category.
Yes, they're
How much of the
transferring to the Department of National Defense, and
right?
I mean there are tricks that NATO members use to make their defense budgets bigger, because they're moving capabilities inside the armed forces umbrella. Yeah, so we'll see some of that. You can categorize a brand new airport. Oh, no, let's pick Churchill, a brand new airport in Churchill, which is to serve the people there. You can call it a bit of military infrastructure as well and get a tick in the box and put some of
Mm.
that money in the 5% pot. I mean, that's the sort of thing that people would be thinking about. Um, Circling back though, just one thing on the peacekeeping side, because those who are watching and who know a lot about the military and that, peacekeeping these days, we have so few Canadians involved in international peacekeeping, around 25 or so, and probably about 20 police officers, civilian police officers. We don't do peacekeeping anymore. We haven't for decades. Um, and we don't like to call it peacekeeping ourselves, peace operations, because most peacekeeping operations are not the traditional ones that we knew about, where you separate two sides and they've both agreed to stop fighting, so you can talk to people and get agreements in place and stuff. No, I mean we put peacekeepers in war war situations, especially in Africa, where there are tens of thousands of
Well,
peacekeepers.
and Afghanistan.
Well, Afghanistan for us was a it was a combat operation. You could say we were there to keep the peace, and that is very true. We were there to secure the country and allow it to develop. But it was it was an insurgency and it was combat. But then again, having said that, Robin, you're absolutely right. If you go into some of these missions in Africa, you'd find yourself in very similar situations
Right.
under the umbrella of the UN. NATO was the big ticket item in Afghanistan. Under a UN operation in some place in Africa, you would find yourself, like in Mali, for example. The French have left Mali. The UN has the European Union. The Russians are there supporting the Malayan government in their fight against insurgents in the north and in the center of the country. So anywhere you go these days, that whole traditional peacekeeping that we all grew to love is seldom to be found.
We're almost out of time here, Chris, and I feel guilty that we don't have more time because we didn't really have a chance. We just skirted around China and the fact that we're talking to China again. Sounds like Mark Carney wants to go to China and talk to President Xi, and we want to sell them canola again, and we got to figure out a lot of other things, whether we should be building the new replacements for our BC ferry fleet in China. I guess these are all things up for debate. Maybe in a minute, if you could just give us that. Do you think that that's the next great frontier in terms of Canada's diplomacy push, is looking to the east, not the west?
We talk about it a lot in the Indo-Pacific strategy that we head that way. And of course, we have a big trade agreement with many of the countries in the region, and we trade with China. They're our number two trading partner, 130 billion or so in two-way trade. We have a lot of investment in China as well. So taking advantage of the Chinese market is, I think, an important thing for us to do and continue to do. And the fact is, in this geopolitical world that we live in, if you're not selling canola to China, the Australians and the Brazilians will be happy to do so. And if China puts a ban on Australian coal like they have in the past, Canada is happy to make up the difference. And this is what your friends do to one another. So this is hard geopolitics. Values come into play, but sometimes you have to make a tough call between your interests and your values. And as Canadians, we don't like doing that, but we also have to think about the welfare and the future of our own country at the same time.
What a brilliant way to end the show. Right on.
Love it. We just love it, and we love having you on the Rumble Room, Chris. And we'll get you back, and we'll talk more about China, and we'll talk more about other things. But thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, guys. I'm off to my next one where I'm going to have similar.
You're
You
so
warmed me up.
popular. You're so
Ooh,
popular. Well,
The Rumble Room is the
we get the
official
Rumble Room.
warm-up.
We get the gloves out, Chris. That's the thing. We get the gloves out. So that's
Yeah.
great. And John, I think that's it for the show.
Okay.
That's it.
All
And
right.
we're going to end our live stream right now. Thank you, Chris. Take care.